my dears, today we are going to be talking about a group of people that I find fascinating. Today we're going to be talking about allies.
Do you approve of me? Does the black community approve of me? Do I have your approval? Approve of me?
So if you watch my recent video, I basically did a reaction to some of the crazy things that allies say on social media, specifically on TikTok.
If you're white, yes, you are racist. Even if you think you're woke, we all benefit from oppression. Pretending you're not racist only makes racism grow.
So if you spend enough time on the internet, you may have heard some people say things like, I am an ally of insert community here. Or you may have even heard some people call out to their allies. Sometimes you'll see some videos say, I'm calling out to all the allies because they need help with something or they need extra support for a specific cause.
Pride Month is almost over, which means we are tired. So allies, I'm talking to you. As you probably know, all over the country, there are hundreds of bills being introduced and some that have even passed that are trying to discriminate against the LGBTQ plus community. So here are some ways as an ally that you can help and support the LGBTQ plus community.
So for those of you who've ever wondered, what are they talking about? What is this ally thing that they keep speaking of? Are we at war? Well, I guess it would depend on who you ask, because I guess some people would say that we are currently in a culture war. So I guess kinda? The term ally or allies is typically most commonly used in leftist online spaces. I don't think I've ever heard a person in real life call themselves an ally. And I don't even know how I'd react if that was to happen, because that would be very cringy. So according to Promo, an ally is an individual who speaks out and stands up for a person or group that is targeted and discriminated against. An ally works to end oppression by supporting and advocating for people who are stigmatized, discriminated against, or treated unfairly. It's also worth mentioning that in order for you to be an ally, you typically have to be outside of the group. And there are organizations like Pillar who give you instructions on how you can be a good ally. So Pillar says, in order to be a good ally, you must always center the impacted. Listen and learn from those who live in oppression. Leverage your privilege and yield the floor. Now, when you listen to the way that organizations like Pillar and Promo describe allies, it sounds so lovely. But like most things, they sound good on paper, but the reality looks a little bit different. As someone who's been paying close attention to allies, I can say that this doesn't fully encompass how allies are or how they behave, especially online. And based on what I have seen, I would say that there's actually probably around 4 different types of allies, or at least 4 that I've noticed. The well-intentioned ally. So this is a person who cares about other groups and who typically cares about helping them achieve their rights or equal treatment. Now, there are plenty of kind, good-hearted people who care about other human beings, but yet these people manage to be kind and caring towards different types of human beings without necessarily calling themselves allies. But I've noticed that the ones who do typically tend to be really young, and they've also typically learnt the term during their time in an indoctrination camp, also known as university, or they've likely picked up the word from social media. Now, what separates the well-intentioned ally from your regular kind-hearted good Samaritan? I would personally say what separates these 2 types of people is the political undertone. The word ally has historically been used to describe nations who are on the same side during times of war. And as there are people who think we are in a culture war at the moment, the word ally starts to become very fitting. When someone proclaims themselves as an ally, they are actually communicating 2 different messages. The first is that they support the activist goals of the group that they are declaring themselves an ally to. And the second is that they share their political goals as well. It's a communication that they're also on the same political side. It's not a coincidence that the type of people who typically declare themselves as allies or call themselves allies, 99% of the time also happen to be leftists. The well-intentioned ally is probably, in my opinion, the most common type of ally. So how they will typically show their allyship is through educating their friends and family, especially if they say things that they deem to be problematic. They may also emotionally blackmail their friends and family by threatening to never speak to them again or to cut them out of their lives if they don't change their perspective on certain political issues. You may also see this type of ally being offended on other people's behalf. They will often repeat talking points that they've seen from social justice activists on social media. And this is typically the ally that you'll find with a laundry list of things in their bio, from pronouns to flags to BLM and, you know, the fist with like all the different colors. Yeah, They're all about that. They may have even posted a black square on their Instagram, and they typically repost a lot of activist content to spread the word. And they may also attend protests and parades in order to show support. And as I mentioned before, I think that this is the most common type of ally. The guilt-stricken ally. Now, this ally I would say is probably the most interesting out of the four because it's definitely the most unique. This ally seems to only exist in the context of race. I've never seen this type of ally exist with other groups. And not only do they seem to be very specific to race, but they also seem to be way more common in the US than anywhere else in the world. And I think it's likely to do with the history. So like the well-intentioned ally, these allies do also mean well and are typically motivated by good intentions. They also tend to be privileged in terms of like financially privileged. So they tend to be middle to upper class. My theory when it comes to the guilt-stricken ally is that because they do actually have privilege, because they're wealthy, it's a lot easier to convince this type of ally that they have white privilege. It's easier to convince them that the comforts that they enjoy are the result of the sins that their ancestors did in the past. It's a lot easier to convince someone of that kind of background of this narrative compared to, say, a working class white person who's maybe struggling to make rent or struggling to pay their bills or is even homeless. It's a lot harder to convince someone from that background that their white skin has awarded them all of these luxuries. Now, I have seen some people say that when they're talking about white privilege, they're not talking about socioeconomic status or financial wealth. But I find this really bizarre because often when you see them asking for things in order to bridge the gap and to overcome their lack of privilege, the type of things that they typically ask for are things like donations, reparations, as well as diversity quotas in prestigious universities or prestigious job positions. So I guess the question is, if the type of privilege you're referring to has nothing to do with socioeconomic status and nothing to do with financial wealth, then why is it that most of the things that you request in order to overcome your lack of privilege are things that would improve someone's socioeconomic status or financial wealth? The guilt-stricken ally is motivated by the guilt that they feel for their privileged life. Historical events have essentially led them to experience something very similar to survivor's remorse. Survivor's remorse is when someone feels guilty about an event because they didn't experience a loss but someone else did. And I think understanding this also gives us some insight into why this type of ally may be more common in the US compared to, say, Britain. When we look at the US's history, because they had domestic African slavery, they also had segregation and Jim Crow laws, it seems as though some white Americans have internalized these historical events and it has led them to experience something very similar to survivor's remorse. They feel guilty about the fact that these historical events happened in the US and had more of a detrimental impact on Black Americans compared to themselves. And the guilt seems to be stronger the more wealthy they are. Their wealth then reinforces the idea that they benefited from these historical events. Activists across different social groups have made it clear that silence is violence and that if you are not actively helping to resolve the problem, then you are part of the problem. As Angela Y. Davis said, in a racist society, it is not enough to not be racist. We must be anti-racist. Now, what exactly does that mean? I'm not entirely sure. And it seems to me that this ambiguity on what a person must do to be an effective anti-racist has actually made it really easy for some activists to exploit this particular type of ally. Because the guilt-stricken ally tends to be wealthier, and they also are riddled with guilt for things that happened in the past, they tend to be more desperate to alleviate this feeling of guilt. And there are some activists who are more than happy to help them feel as though they're doing that by getting them to donate to scammy organizations like BLM or to donate to GoFundMe scams. This type of ally is also way more likely to buy books on how to be less racist. They'll pay a lot of money to attend seminars on anti-racism, and they'll also happily pay stupid amounts of money to attend events like Race to Dinner. So Race to Dinner is an event in the US where well-off or wealthy white women basically come together to discuss all the unconscious biases that they may have, and they just basically discuss all the different ways that they can improve and be less racist. According to The Guardian, each one of these dinners costs $2,500. $2,500 to sit around a table and talk about how you could be less racist. Yep. You may also see this type of ally declaring that they will donate all of their wealth to minority charities or minority families when they pass away.
You're white, obviously. What can you do to change that saying it's not okay to be white. What can you do to change that?
Fund the United Negro College Fund, leave your inheritance to African American people, like the beaches, give them back the property that was stolen from them, African Americans particularly, but yeah.
Are you yourself planning on giving your inheritance to African American people?
Do all sorts of that stuff already, yeah.
Something I've noticed about this type of ally as well is that they also tend to be the most clumsy. You'll find them often unwittingly perpetuating stereotypes about black people in an effort to appear more relatable or in an effort to seem more understanding.
I'm Ami Horowitz, and I'm here in Berkeley, California to find out if voter ID laws suppress the black vote.
I think voter ID laws are a way to perpetuate racism.
Would you go as far as say those laws are racist?
For sure.
Do you think it suppresses the African American vote?
Definitely.
Tell us how.
Because they're less likely to have state IDs.
Minority voters are less likely to have the kinds of IDs that have been described or required.
These type of people don't live in areas with easy access to DMVs or other places where they can get identification.
You can always get IDs you do over the internet. Does that also make it difficult for black people in particular?
Yeah, you have to have access to the internet. You have to be able to pay an internet service provider for certain fees.
Do you think that's harder for black people to go online?
Well, I feel like they don't have the knowledge of how it works.
A lot of people have smartphones, but you might not have data.
For most of the communities, they don't really know what is out there just because they're not aware or they're not informed. I also think there's a repression of black voting with how if you're a convicted felon, you're not allowed to vote and everything. And when you look at swing states like Florida, that's a huge population of the African Americans.
Now I'm here in East Harlem to ask black people their thoughts on what you just heard. Do you have ID normally? Do you carry ID around?
Yes, I have state ID.
Do you carry ID?
Yes, I do.
Do you know any black person who doesn't carry ID?
No. Everyone that I know has an ID. Why would they think we don't have ID?
This also reminds me of when this happened on The View.
There are a lot of Latinos here in this country that do agree that the immigration problem is a problem and it does need to be addressed and it does need to be fixed.
Interesting.
But making those comments, those racist comments, do not help.
And if you kick every Latino out of this country, then who is going to be cleaning your toilet, Donald Trump?
Oh, that's no.
In the sense that, you know what I mean? What I'm saying
there's more jobs to be
in LA, they always
but they Latinos are not only the only people.
I didn't mean it like that. Come on. No, I would never mean it like that.
And remember when Biden said this?
We have this notion that somehow if you're poor, you cannot do it. Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids.
There seem to be many instances like this where they try to be or try to appear supportive, but end up coming across as ignorant or offensive instead.
I'm in Silver Lake, which is already a bad idea, but I like the food over there. It's a great spot. They have some good coffee shops. But I'm over there, and this girl's looking at me, and I'm looking at her, I'm looking at her. She's looking at me, she's going to say something. So I'm like, maybe she should watch my channel, I don't know. She goes, I just want to say you're really pretty. I said, oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I do. She goes, yeah, you're a super pretty black girl. I'm obsessed. The point is that this chick said this to me, and you know what I responded with? Because I usually just kind of get uncomfortable when people say stupid stuff to me. I just kind of try to evade the situation, but I'm like, you know what? I have time. I said, what a strange thing to say. And just held eye contact. I said, what a strange thing to say. She goes, wait, why? She goes, well, statistically speaking, they love to try to talk down to me. They love to try to be like, well, technically. She goes, well, statistically speaking, people have always seen black women as unattractive as well as Asian men, according to the study that was done by Bumble. So you see how she's already coming at me from this angle of, because I feel sorry for you, because stats, because science said this. Why would you say, what person in the right mind is like, let me go up to a person and say, have you ever gone up to a woman and be like, you're pretty for a white woman, you're pretty for an Asian girl. No one says that. It's just weird. But then it's like, oh, no, I'm here to help you. I'm like, no, we don't want your help. Trust me. On behalf of black Americans who are actually chill and normal, and we're just minding our business going about our day, we don't care. We don't want your help. We just want to fit in with society and just exist.
And we saw this kind of stuff in my last video, where Hiram saw a video of a monkey stealing a banana. And because some people commented, well, he made a connection between the monkey and black people, and then assumed that the people who were commenting, well, were doing so to be racist. We also saw this with the school teacher who was claiming that sitting still and being respectful in a classroom is a white thing and something that's not practiced in other cultures. As bizarre as it is, it seems to be the case that the anti-racism ideology sometimes causes people to actually think in a more racist way. The narcissistic ally. Now we're starting to get into the type of allies that I have no time for. Probably the key thing to note about the narcissistic ally is that they are more loyal to their narcissism than they are to any particular group that they've attached themselves to. Duke Health lists 9 traits of a narcissist, and some of them are as follows: a sense of self-importance, preoccupied with power, beauty, or success, entitled, interpersonally exploitative for their own gain, arrogant, lack empathy, and must be admired. The narcissist desires success and praise, as well as admiration. What better way to accomplish that than by positioning yourself as a righteous person who cares so much about the marginalized? Even better than that, if you can position yourself as someone who understands that you are part of the problem. Typically, you'll be met with a lot of praise and a lot of people who view you as very noble and someone with a lot of humility and someone who's caring and compassionate. You may be able to utilize this to sell books, to give speeches at seminars, to grow a social media following. Narcissistic allies have a very high sense of self-importance, so naturally they think that they are absolutely the authority to speak on these issues. You'll often see these types of allies either speaking for or speaking over the group that they've declared themselves an ally to. And this type of ally does have a really bad reputation of hijacking movements or allocating themselves as a voice for the movement. Whenever I see people complaining about their allies, this is definitely one of the main complaints that I see. I've seen a lot of trans people complain that a lot of the harm being done to their reputation and a lot of the demands that are being made are from activists who aren't even trans. And as I'm sure you can imagine, narcissists don't really take constructive criticism very well. When I think of the behaviors of a narcissistic ally, Robin DiAngelo springs to mind. Robin DiAngelo is the author of White Fragility and Nice Racism. She essentially argues that anti-blackness and racism is embedded into American culture. Like many other critical race theorists, she believes that the question should not be if racism played a role in a situation, but rather the question should be, how did racism play a role in a situation?
First of all, we're already divided by race. And focusing on race is not what did it. I would say not focusing on race, refusing to grapple with how race shapes virtually everything is what keeps us divided. And that is a very white narrative. All of those narratives function to get race off the table, close the exploration, exempt the person from any further engagement, and protect the racial hierarchy and the white position with it, which is an unequal hierarchy. The challenge I want to offer my fellow white people is changing the question from if to how. So dominant culture asks, if I'm racist. And I want to change that question to how have I been shaped by the forces of racism? How is racism manifesting in my life? Because it circulates 24/7, 365. None of us can be and none of us were exempt from its forces. And this is where individualism can come in. I have a particular story, but that story didn't exempt me. And so I can ask myself, how did all the things I see as unique about me set me up into the overall racist structure? Because it did.
She has gained a lot of success for her work. She was a US bestseller. She's also made a lot of money from doing speeches. DiAngelo has been criticized by some Black Americans on her work, and her response has been very dismissive, to say the least.
You know, on the other hand, I have to say some of the more stinging critiques that I've seen have come from people of color. Is that in trying to point the finger at white people, that you dehumanize and flatten out Black people in particular, or people of color, that people of color become sort of the moral authority. They are the ones who are the wise ones. They are the ones who sort of gift everyone with their moral sensibility. And that's kind of racist in its own way. What do you say to that?
Oh, well,
I mean, Black people can be jerks too, right? Black people can be pompous, self-absorbed, narrow-minded, bigoted jerks too.
There have always been Black people who will claim that racism doesn't exist, and they rarely ever experienced it, that, you know, the problems that Black people have are brought upon themselves, and they will be embraced, and their voices will be amplified. And so I don't take that as seriously as I take somebody who has a record and a commitment to anti-racism critiquing me. So let's move to those folks.
So essentially what D'Angelo is saying is she's not interested in the opinions of Black people who don't already share her anti-racism ideological perspective. D'Angelo strawmans the Black people who disagree with her by doing what many white allies and many Black progressives do on a regular basis, which is assert that if you are a Black person who has criticism of their arguments, or you disagree with the notion that racism shapes every facet of your existence, then that must mean that you don't believe racism exists at all, or you must have never experienced racism, which completely contradicts their ideology, because how can they accuse you of not experiencing racism while simultaneously arguing that racism shapes your entire existence? This is the laziest crap I see coming from people like this all the time. Disagreeing with you is not the same as denying the existence of racism. Another interesting example of allies behaving like this is when Hasan Piker was lashing out at a trans viewer over them criticizing how he handled a trans debate. The Willymacshow covered it, so I will link the video in my description if you want the full context. But the question is, why do these allies respond this way to criticism? I thought Pillar said that in order to be an ally, you must center the impacted. You must listen to those who live with the oppression. Well, my dear, the answer is what I said earlier before. The narcissistic ally is loyal to their narcissism, not to the group that they have attached themselves to. These groups merely serve as a useful tool for them to get the admiration and success that they believe they should have. Their behavior displays a lack of empathy and also a high level of arrogance. Rather than engaging with the group that they claim to be allies of in order to understand the nuances within their experiences, as well as the nuances with the way that many people within this group think, because no group is monolithic, not every group agrees with each other. So rather than understanding the nuances that exist among these groups, your narcissistic ally typically tends to prefer to talk far more than they care to listen. And because of their high sense of self-importance and how sure they are of themselves, your criticism actually just annoys them. Because I mean, how dare you? How dare you not accept the gracious, generous help of the narcissistic ally after they have exploited your issues for clout and wealth? Yet you can't even say thank you for their virtue signals. Despicable. When it comes to doing any real meaningful work on the ground, you're very unlikely going to see this type of ally doing so. And even if they do, because they don't actually listen to the people who they claim to be allies of, they often just don't do anything that these groups actually want or need, and often just make things worse.
You took down bus routes! There are people who live in this neighborhood who have to go back uptown to work! And you are here profiting off of our pain! So you protest every single last one of you! You think about what it's like to be a Black woman in this neighborhood who lives with people in public housing who now have to walk through. So when you think about this anger and this rage, because there's a way to get answers, every single last one of you better be registered to vote. Every single last one of you.
We are. Yeah.
So do me a favor, for every single person out here protesting, remember, there's 3 homeless men who rely on that as a charging station. And what? Will it even work now? For the sake of what? So you can go back home to your comforts. Sit in your house and think that you did work today. There are people out here who work in these bodegas, who are security officers, who are maybe not descendants of slavery, but came over here as immigrants to do their jobs.
So great, everybody's.
And you created an unsafe environment. And I am tired of it.
The political ally. Last but not least, we have the political ally. The political ally has many of the traits of the narcissistic ally, but the political ally is definitely laser focused on political gain. This is the type of ally that Malcolm X was talking about decades ago when he was warning people about white liberals.
The white liberal differs from the white conservative only in one way. The liberal is more deceitful, more hypocritical than the conservative. Both want power, but the white liberal is the one who has perfected the art of posing as the Negro's friend and benefactor. And by winning the friendship and support of the Negro, the white liberal is able to use the Negro as a pawn or a weapon in this political football game that is constantly raging between the white liberals and the white conservatives.
At the beginning of this video, you may remember that I mentioned that most allies typically tend to be from the left, the more progressive left, I would say. Malcolm X was very accurate in his analysis of these allies. They do typically tend to use these minority groups as essentially pawns for political warfare. Shoe on Head made a video discussing the male loneliness epidemic, and one of the things that she noted within that video is how progressives seem to only care about men or men's issues when they're talking about how to retain them on the left or to stop them from leaving the left and joining the right.
But the issue is a lot of this lefty pro-men content, it's always framed around how do we get them? As if men are just pawns and tools for your personal politics. How do we make the left more appealing to men? How do we stop lonely men from moving to Andrew Tate? Instead of just, how do we help men? And I think that's a really big issue. Both sides seem to treat men as political fodder. Disposable soldiers in the culture war and real war.
Because to the political ally, it's all about politics, not the value of the individual. It's always really interesting to me to watch this type of ally going from being kind and compassionate and sweet to being vile and horrendous the moment they see that you don't align with them politically. Now, why would they do that? Why would male feminists become misogynistic towards some women?
If anyone makes an expression like this at the camera at any point, it's legally okay to be sexist towards them. I'll be taking this information to heart as I move forward with this video. Gonna condescend to me? That's okay. I'm going to evoke several millennia of oppression against you. That's fair.
Darling, I'm very concerned. This is troubling behaviour. Vaush, I don't care.
Shut up, bitch. Stupid fucking bitch.
Why would some allies suddenly become racist towards ethnic minorities? In case anyone wants to claim I'm a racist for calling out Clarence Thomas for the Uncle Tom that he most certainly is, Thomas is making it clear how much he hates gay rights. Sounds pretty bigoted to me. How screwed up is Clarence Thomas's interpretation of the Constitution? George Washington and Thomas Jefferson would have had him picking cotton on their plantations. He wouldn't get anywhere near the Supreme Court except to clean the toilets. Damn. With allies like these, who needs enemies? Now, I can understand why Thomas's political views aren't very popular with progressives. That being said, call me unreasonable, but I do think it's possible for you to disagree with someone's political position without resorting to racism. So it seems to me that in the same way that male feminists think it's perfectly acceptable to be misogynists if you don't agree with them, white allies seem to think it's perfectly acceptable to be racist if you don't agree with them. Whenever they see an ethnic minority person who is stepping out of the box that they think they should be in, they are more than happy to remind them to get back in their place.
If you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
I had to remind him that he was a black person
so he can't vote for Donald Trump, and that he shouldn't be influencing an entire swath of people who may listen to him because he's worried about his own personal pocketbook.
You're attacked also in many respects because of your race, because you're not supposed to think like this and talk like this. A lot of white liberals just don't like it, do they?
Well, they're the most racist people there are because, they put you in a little category, a little box. You have to think this way. How could you dare come off the plantation?
From my standpoint, as a black American, as far as I'm concerned, it is a high-tech lynching for uppity blacks who in any way deign to think for themselves, to do for themselves, to have different ideas. And it is a message that unless you kowtow to an old order, this is what will happen to you.
In the same way that the narcissistic ally is loyal to their narcissism, the political ally is not loyal to you either. They're loyal to their political ideology. And so the moment you display that you don't share their political views or their political goals, even if you do fit into one of these minority groups that they claim to care so much about, they will become quite hostile and vile towards you because, quite frankly, if you don't share their political views and goals, then you're kind of useless to them, so they don't really have a reason to pretend to like you. George Orwell pointed out that for some socialists, they are not socialists because they love the poor. They're socialists because they hate the rich. And I think the same can be said about some of these allies. They're not allies because they care so much about these minority groups. They're allies because they hate the conservatives. And you are a very useful tool. It's exactly what Malcolm X described. Something that some people have noticed is that if you are a woman, LGBT or trans or an ethnic minority person, you will typically get the most vitriol from these so-called allies or these so-called kind and compassionate progressives. In fact, I'm pretty sure they hate those of us who fit into these groups who don't subscribe to their progressive worldview way more than they hate their favorite usual enemy, which is the white straight man. And my speculation on why this is because, well, they quite frankly view you as a traitor. To understand the political ally, it helps to understand the mind of progressives, because often those who call themselves allies typically tend to be more progressive. They don't really tend to be liberals or definitely not conservatives. They believe that they have the monopoly on morality. Not only that, but they've also convinced themselves that they are absolutely the only people who care. And so from their perspective, if you fit into any of those groups, then they own you. Duh. Because they believe they're the only ones who care about you. They're the only ones who care about your issues. They're the only ones who are not bigoted towards you, despite the fact that the moment you display any sign that you don't agree with them politically, all their bigotry suddenly becomes fully on show. But despite all of this, they are still very much convinced that they are the only good guys and they are the only ones who care about these groups. So naturally, when you turn your back on them and decide that actually, I don't agree with the things that you're saying, I don't share your worldview, they take that as a slap in the face. Because to them, it just doesn't make sense. Surely if the progressives are the only group that truly care about you, why would you not be on their team? Well, unless you hate yourself, unless you have some kind of internalized misogyny or some kind of internalized homophobia or internalized racism or internalized transphobia. It's a logical conclusion to come to. If you convince yourself that you're the only group that's good and you're the only group that cares about people, then naturally the groups that you advocate for or you think you're advocating for, if they don't choose to be on your side, then the only way you can rationalize that is by assuming that it's because they have self-hatred. Because if we're the side that cares about you, why would you not want to be here unless you don't care about yourself? The problem with these leftists or progressives, whatever you want to call them, is they have a very abstract view of all of these groups. They don't view these groups as consisting of multiple individuals with different experiences, different backgrounds, different cultures. They don't view these groups as consisting of multiple individuals with different beliefs and who have perspectives that have been formed through their diverse experiences. Because I talk so much about individualism in this section of the video, I thought it'd be worth noting that while I do value individualism, I'm not a complete individualist. I acknowledge that there are times when you need to look at a whole group. For example, if you are a woman, there are going to be some experiences that you have in common with other women because of your sex. The same is true for other things like race and sexuality, etc. So there are times when focusing on the group and the patterns that exist within the group are necessary in order to make changes on a larger societal scale. However, it is possible to do that while still acknowledging and allowing members within these groups the freedom of individuality, because diversity also exists within these groups. But from my experience, progressives often fail to do that. To them, you are just another black person, and so therefore you should think and act like this. Because you're a woman, you should have these views and you should think and act like this. Because you are gay, you should think and act and talk like this. Their inability to acknowledge that all of these groups consist of multiple diverse individuals is what makes it really hard for them to grasp the concept of nuance. The idea that you could have formulated your own thoughts and opinions because of your own different experiences and the things that you've seen in the world or the things that you've learned is not really a concept to them. It's very, very black and white. You either love yourself or you hate yourself. And if you love yourself, then of course you would be a progressive. Like, duh. It's the only logical explanation. If you agree with progressives, then you're good and you care about yourself and you accept yourself and you love yourself. If you disagree with progressives, then you hate yourself and you're trying to distance yourself from your community or distance yourself from your identity. Because they're just so open-minded, you guys, like so open-minded. Political allies and progressives more generally, accusing people of being self-hating or self-loathing or whatever, is a very useful control tactic. Because if you can create the idea that the in-group thinks this, and if you deviate from this way of thinking, then you must hate yourself, or you must be selling out, or you must be doing whatever. It's quite a useful mechanism to try and get people back in line and get them to move the way you want them to move politically. It also helps to shut up those who don't agree with them politically. Because if you know that you're going to be accused of abandoning your community or being a sellout or trying to appease your oppressors or trying to distance yourself from your identity and all this kind of stuff, if you know that that's the kind of stuff you're going to be met with, it makes you less likely to feel comfortable to express your views out loud, which is very useful in creating the illusion that no one else within your group agrees with you or thinks like you. So what I've noticed about political allies and progressives more generally is that they love mean girl tactics, from reputation destruction to emotional manipulation and emotional blackmail to excluding you from the group. So when they try to exclude you while calling you names and accusing you of having internalized isms and phobias, that's basically their equivalent to when schoolgirls kick out a member of their group and let them know that you can't sit with us.
Gina, you're wearing sweatpants. It's Monday. So that's against the rules and you can't sit with us.
They behave like the cliquey, bitchy girls in school that just unfortunately never got around to growing out of it. It can't just be that you actually do care about your group and you do actually want what's best for them, but you have different ideas on what the problems are and what the best solutions would be. No. You just hate yourself. So what are my overall views on allies? I personally think that often it's just well-intentioned nonsense. There are plenty of people who care about groups outside of their own, but none of these people ever feel the need to declare themselves as allies. It seems to have become more of a political virtue signal than an actual sign of genuine care. As I've discussed in this video, there are multiple different things that motivate these allies. Sometimes they are good intentions, sometimes they are selfish ones. I find the whole concept of ally and allies to be very peculiar and also quite meaningless. They may say that they're an ally to the trans community, but yet the moment they see someone like Buck Angel or Blair White or Marcus, suddenly they become very hostile. They may declare themselves to be an ally of black people, but then the moment they see someone like Candace Owens or Kemi Badenoch, suddenly they become very hostile. If your allyship is conditional on the basis that the people you are trying to extend your allyship to agree with you, then quite clearly your allyship is not to their immutable characteristics or to their social group, but more so to their beliefs and values. And here's the thing, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. In fact, I think that's a lot more respectable, to support someone because you like their character and you like what they stand for, as opposed to supporting them for something as superficial as their identity. There is absolutely nothing wrong with you simply supporting someone because you share the same political views or you share the same beliefs and values. Both sides do this. It's just for whatever reason the left chooses to be really fake about it. I guess I will end this video by saying this. Caring about people does not require virtue signals or labels. And declaring yourself an ally doesn't inherently make you trustworthy or make you a good person. In fact, I think many are starting to notice now that it's often a very empty platitude. Most people care about other people, even if they're not the same as them, and they care about them for the simple reason that they are a fellow human being. Most people also want equality and to just be treated normally. A lot of the time, these allies have a savior complex, which is incredibly patronizing. I often find that those who don't call themselves allies and who don't really engage in all of this like online politics stuff tend to be the ones who actually treat you like an equal. But those are just my thoughts on allies. I would be very, very interested to hear your thoughts on allies. Have you ever considered or called yourself an ally? And if you fit into any of the groups that I've described today, I'd be very curious to know what your personal thoughts are on your allies. Do you agree with the stuff that they do? Do they annoy you? I'd be intrigued to know whether or not you found your allies to be helpful or you found them to be more of a detriment. But that is all for this video. If you've enjoyed it, you may as well like and subscribe. I am also on other socials and I make music if you would like to check that out. Thank you for giving me your time today, and I will see you in my next video.